I should never have fallen in love with him. But when I realized it, it was too late. Since I was a child, I have always been by Kaio's side. He was my cousin, but our relationship was never like normal cousins. We have always been more than that. We have always been best friends, accomplices in everything, inseparable. He was my refuge on bad days, my safe haven when the world seemed too difficult. And I loved him. I've always loved him. At first, it was a childish admiration. He was 2 years older than me, had an unassuming manner, a crooked smile that had made my heart race ever since I was old enough to understand what it was like to have butterflies in my stomach. We grew up together, sharing secrets, laughter, and dreams. But what I never told anyone, what I could never tell them, is that this childhood love one day turned into something much greater. The first time I realized that my feelings went beyond friendship was one random summer when we were 12 and 14. We were at our grandmother's house, and I remember the way the sun shone on his face as we played in the backyard. Kaio was beautiful. She had warm brown eyes like caramel, wind-blown hair, and that carefree manner that made everything around her seem light. That day, I looked at him differently. It was as if I had suddenly awakened to a truth that had always been there. My heart started beating differently. I wanted to be near him all the time. I wanted him to look at me the way he looked at other girls. But he never realized, or at least that's what I thought. As the years passed, we became teenagers, and something between us began to change. The touches took a little longer than normal. The stares became more intense. There was a tension in the air, something neither of us dared to name. But it was there, burning beneath the surface. And then it happened. It was a warm summer night. We were alone on the terrace of my grandmother's house, looking at the stars, talking about life. I remember the warm breeze, the smell of his perfume mixed with the old wood of the porch. I remember how he looked at me, different from all the other times. "Have you ever kissed anyone?" he asked suddenly. My heart raced. "No." He smiled sideways, leaning closer. The air grew heavy between us. "Want to know what it's like?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded, feeling a heat rise through my body, a nervousness mixed with desire. Then he pressed his lips against mine, slowly, softly, as if he were testing. My first kiss, with Kaio, with the only person I've ever wanted. At that moment, nothing else mattered. At that moment, I knew I would never be able to look at him the same way again. And worst of all, he knew it too. That kiss changed everything, and at the same time, it changed nothing. Kaio was still my cousin, my best friend. But inside me, something had awakened, something I could no longer ignore. In the days following that kiss, I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but it was impossible. Every time Kaio spoke to me, my skin tingled. Every time he laughed, my heart would race. And every time he touched me, even lightly, a shock would run through my body, leaving me breathless. But what about him? Did he feel the same way too? I was trying to find answers in his eyes. Sometimes I thought so. Others, he just seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. Uncertainty killed me. Then came that night. The night we stopped being just cousins. It was a holiday, and our family decided to spend the weekend at a farm. The place was beautiful, with a huge lake, tall trees, and a big wooden house. There were a lot of people, cousins, uncles, family friends. But for me, there was only one person there, Kaio. He spent the whole day avoiding looking at me. He talked and joked with others, as if I wasn't there. This irritated me more than it should have. I wanted him to talk to me, that he would look at me like he did that night on the terrace, to kiss me again. Late in the afternoon, I decided to go to the lake alone. I needed some time for myself. The sun was already beginning to set, and the water reflected an intense gold, making everything even more magical. I was distracted, throwing pebbles into the water, when I heard footsteps behind me. I thought you had drowned. His voice was light, but it carried something more. I turned around slowly. He was there, arms crossed, looking at me in that way that made my legs go weak. "And would you mind?" I teased. He laughed, shaking his head. "Stop the drama. You ignored me all day." He was silent for a moment, then took a step forward. My heart raced. "Is it difficult for you?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard. "What?" "Stay close to me, after that night." My chest rose and fell rapidly. He was so close I could smell him, the heat from his body radiating to me. "Yes," I confessed. Something flashed in his eyes, a mixture of desire and hesitation. "Me too," he admitted. And then he kissed me again. But this time, it wasn't a shy kiss like the first time. It wasn't a test. It was intense, urgent, like he had been holding it in for too long. My mind stopped. My body reacted on its own. My hands went to his hair, pulling him closer. The taste of him mixed with the lake breeze, and I knew, in that instant, that I was lost. He gently pushed me against a tree, his lips sliding down my neck. A shiver ran through my body. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew I wanted more. "This is wrong," I murmured, but my hands said otherwise, squeezing the back of his neck, bringing him closer to me. "I know," he breathed against my skin, "but I can't stop, and neither do I." That night, hidden by the silence of the lake and the veil of darkness, I gave myself to him, to my cousin, to my first love. It was intense, it was desperate, it was hot, and it was our secret. But secrets come at a price, and I was about to find out the hard way. After that night, I thought that nothing in the world could separate me from Kaio. But I was wrong. Fate would still show me that love, when born in sin, has the power to destroy everything. When I returned home after the weekend at the farm, I was no longer the same. Kaio and I didn't talk about what happened. We made no promises. We swore no eternal love. But something between us had changed. We looked at each other differently. We touched each other in a different way. Now, there was something silent between us. Something that screamed every time we were in the same place. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what was right or wrong. I just wanted him. In the months that followed, our secret grew like wildfire. Kaio was waiting for me after school to give me a ride. We always found a way to be alone. Sometimes it was in his car, in the parking lot of some deserted place. Others, in my house, when no one was around. We kissed in secret. We touched each other in the darkness of locked rooms. It was dangerous, wrong, but at the same time, it was the best feeling in the world, until everything started to fall apart. And it all started with Marina. Marina was my best friend since I was little. She knew all my secrets, all except one. I never told her about Kaio, not because I didn't trust her, but because I was afraid. Fear of what she would say, fear of being judged, fear that she would make me see that this could never work. But most of all, I was afraid that if I said out loud that I was in love with my cousin, it would become too real. And the problem is that Marina always liked Kaio. I knew that. Ever since we were little, she was always saying how handsome, charming, funny he was. But I never took it seriously. He was just a silly crush to her, a fantasy. Or at least that's what I thought. That day, I knew my world was going to fall apart. We were on break at school, sitting in the courtyard like we always did. Marina spoke excitedly, gesturing as always, and I tried to pay attention, but my mind was elsewhere. It was in him. That's when she dropped the bombshell. I'm dating. My heart stopped. What? I forced a smile. Who? And then she said the name that destroyed everything inside me. Caius. The world turned. My mouth felt dry. My skin tingled. Kao, my cousin. She laughed, biting her lip, a little embarrassed. Yes, we started talking a few weeks ago, and I don't know. It happened. I wasn't even going to tell you now, but I needed to share this with you. You are my best friend, and we promised to never hide anything from each other. My stomach turned. A lump formed in my throat. Best friend. She trusted me, and I was betraying that trust, because I already knew what it was like to be kissed by Kaio. I already knew what it was like to feel his hands on me, his body next to mine. I had already felt the heat of his skin, heard his hoarse whisper calling my name in the dark. And now, he was with her. I took a deep breath, trying not to let anything show. Wow. My voice came out weaker than I wanted. That was fast. I know, right? She smiled. But it was so natural. I don't know. It just feels right, you know? None of this felt right. I wanted to run, scream, demand answers. How could he do this, after all? But I just smiled, even as my chest burned. I'm happy for you, Lieutenant. That night, I cried myself to sleep. And the next day, I did the only thing I could. I pretended nothing had happened. I pretended I had never loved Kaio. I pretended we had never been a secret. I pretended my heart wasn't breaking every time I saw them together. But there was one thing I couldn't pretend. With each passing day, with each smile Marina gave him, with each casual touch I witnessed, the hatred and desire inside me grew, and soon I knew it was going to consume me completely. They say that what the eyes don't see, the heart doesn't feel. But what happens when the eyes see everything? When every smile, every touch, every stolen kiss between the two becomes a blade tearing inside? I tried to ignore it. I tried to stifle what I felt. But desire and jealousy are hungry monsters, and I was about to be devoured. Days turned into weeks. The weeks, months, and all this time, I had to watch my world fall apart without being able to do anything. Kaio and Marina were together, officially, publicly, like a normal couple. No secrets, no guilt. It hurts. God, how it hurts. At first, I tried to walk away. I made excuses, said I was busy, that I needed to study. But Marina was my best friend. She missed me. And Kaio, well, Kaio didn't seem to feel anything. Worse than seeing them together was realizing that he was managing to move on. Did I mean so little? Has he never felt what I felt? Deep down, I knew better. Because sometimes, when no one was looking, I would catch Kaio watching me. And it wasn't just any way. It was intense, loaded with something he was trying to hide. But he didn't say anything. I didn't try to explain myself. And it killed me a little more every day. The first big blow came the day Marina showed up at my house, jumping for joy. I need to tell you something. What it was, he smiled, trying to maintain his pose. Kaio and I, we had sex. The air fled from my lungs. I had to force myself not to show anything, to keep breathing, to not freak out right there. Seriously? My voice failed. She laughed, biting her lip. Yes, it was amazing. He was so... Marina sighed, lost in memories. I wanted to vomit. The idea of Kaio touching another woman the way he touched me, whispering the same words, moaning against her skin. It was unbearable. But I smiled, because that's what I had to do. Because that was my punishment for being so stupid. But fate wasn't going to stop there. He still had one more blow in store for me. It was just another night, a party at a mutual friend's house. Marina insisted that I go, and I accepted. Not because I wanted to, but because I was tired of looking weird. I got there, and did what I always did. I smiled, I talked, I pretended that everything was fine. But at a certain point, I saw him. Kaio was leaning against the kitchen counter, drinking beer, and his eyes were on me. Time seemed to stop. The problem was that Marina wasn't there. She had gone out with some friends to get something from the car, and for the first time in months, Kaio and I were alone. He approached, as if it were inevitable. "You don't talk to me anymore." His voice was low, almost a whisper. My heart raced. "What do you want me to say, Keicho?" He stared at me, his eyes burning. "I want you to stop pretending nothing happened." I swallowed hard. What happened doesn't matter anymore. That matters to me. My stomach turned. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream at him, ask him how he had the courage to stay with Marina after everything. But when he got closer, I smelled him, saw his eyes lock on my mouth, and everything inside me screamed for him again. "Kaio," my voice failed. "You say you don't feel anything anymore," he murmured. He looks into my eyes and tells me. My mouth opened, but nothing came out, because it was a lie. I felt it. God, how I felt. That's when he did. Kaio raised his hand and ran his thumb against my lower lip. A minimal touch, almost innocent. But it was enough to set me on fire. And it was there, in that moment, that I realized that it was never going to end. That no matter how much I tried to run away, how much I tried to hide, to forget, Kaio was mine, and I was his, even if it destroyed everything. The problem with playing with fire is that sooner or later it burns, and I knew it. I knew it from the first touch, from the first kiss, from the first time I gave myself to him. But some things are impossible to avoid. Some flames are made to consume, and I was about to be reduced to ashes. I should have walked away that night. I should have looked Kaio in the eyes and told him that it was in the past, that he no longer meant anything to me. But I lied. Or maybe it was worse, because in the end, I said nothing, and that was enough for him to understand everything. I left the kitchen with my heart racing, my hands shaking. I threw myself back into the party, trying to pretend everything was okay. But I could feel his gaze burning into my back. I knew it wasn't over there. And I was right. In the following days, something changed. Kaio started to appear more, always with Marina, always close to me. But now it was different. Now their gazes lingered too long. Now his accidental touch seemed purposeful. Now, when he spoke to me, his voice had that same hoarseness as before, the one that made me lose my footing, and I hated it. I hated it because Marina couldn't see anything. She was still smiling, talking about her relationship, making plans. She trusted me. She trusted him. But Kaio was playing with fire, and I was about to set it all on fire. It happened at Marina's family's beach house. She insisted that we all spend a weekend there. A large group. Mutual friends. I almost refused. But the truth was, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it killed me, I couldn't stay away from him. The trip was normal, at least at first. Sun, sea, laughter, photos. But at night, when alcohol entered the picture, the tension became unbearable. Marina drank too much and ended up going to bed early. Other friends were scattered around the room, some talking, others already unconscious. And I was in the kitchen, alone, trying to convince myself that going to sleep was the best option. That's when he appeared. Kaio, leaning against the door, watching me with that look filled with everything we never talked about. My heart raced. "You ran away from me that night," he said, his voice low and heavy. "I did what I had to," I replied, turning my back. But he came to me, slowly, like a predator about to strike. "Then do it again," he challenged, stopping behind me. I trembled. "Kaio, come on, run away," he whispered against the back of my neck, his breath hot on my skin. "But if you don't go now, I won't stop." I closed my eyes. My mind was screaming to run, but my body had already decided. When I turned to face him, I already knew what was going to happen. Because there was no longer right or wrong. There was no more guilt, no more fear, no more promises. There was only desire. Kaio kissed me, and this time, it wasn't a stolen, desperate kiss. It was intense, slow, full of everything that was stored inside us. And when his hands pulled me closer, when our bodies fit together in that forbidden heat, I knew there was no turning back. Guilt tastes bitter, but desire tastes sweet, addictive. And between the two, I've always chosen what makes me feel alive. I should have stopped. I should have pushed Kaio. I should have run away. I should have done anything. But I didn't. In that moment, with his mouth on mine, with his hands running over my skin, as if he memorized me, as if he wanted me more than anything else in the world. I gave in. Again. In the kitchen of the beach house, with our friends spread out in the other room, with Marina sleeping upstairs. I gave myself to him, as I always did. And it was different from all the other times. There was urgency, of course. There was fire, that latent desire, always on the verge of consuming us. But there was also something new, something more intense, as if we were drowning, and that moment was our only breath. His lips traced a burning path down my neck. His hands gripped my waist, my hips, as if he wanted me closer, deeper inside him. I was panting. He pressed me against the wall, his thighs pressing against mine. "Tell me to stop," he whispered against my mouth. I didn't say, because at that moment, I didn't want him to stop. I wanted to lose myself in it. I wanted to forget reality, forget Marina, forget the world. And that's exactly what we did. There, in the silence of the kitchen, under the weak moonlight coming through the window, Kaio and I belonged to each other again. And it was perfect. It was like coming home, as if time had stopped just for us. But time never stops. And when I woke up the next morning, reality hit me like a violent tide. I got up before him, hurriedly put on my clothes and left the room without looking back. The day was clear. The house was already beginning to come to life. Some people were making coffee. Others were stretching out on the sofa. My heart was pounding. I felt dirty, traitor. Every time my eyes met Marina's, the guilt sank deeper into my chest. But then Kaio appeared, with messy hair, skin still marked by my kisses, eyes fixed on me. and everything in me screamed that I would do it all over again, because I was his, because no matter how much I tried to deny it, Kaio was always the only one for me. I walked away before Marina noticed the way he was looking at me, but she understood something. "It is good too?" he asked, frowning. My mouth opened, but no answer came out, and before I had to say anything, she smiled. "I need to tell you something." My stomach turned. "What?" She sighed excitedly, biting her lip. "Kaio asked me to marry him." The ground disappeared beneath my feet. The air became heavy. The voices around disappeared. What? "He asked me to marry him," he repeated, laughing. "I haven't officially accepted yet, but I think I'll say yes." My heart stopped. My world fell apart. And Kaio, from the other side of the room, looked at me. He burned me with those sinful eyes, full of desire, full of everything we could no longer have. Because for the first time, I understood. He was about to marry my best friend. And me, I was just his secret. Sometimes the biggest enemy is not what's out there. It's what's inside you. The guilt, the desire, the fear, all the feelings that turn us into prisoners. Those words from Marina echoed in my head, like a distant echo, a voice I didn't want to hear. Kaio was about to marry her, and I, the idiot who always thought I could hide what I felt, was watching my world slowly fall apart. I tried to act normally. I tried to smile and congratulate her. I tried to believe that she would really be happy with him. But how could I, when he was the person I had always silently loved? How could I look at Marina, my best friend, and pretend nothing had happened? That I hadn't been in his arms, lost in a kiss that had burned every promise and every promise she had made to me. I felt the weight of my lies, the burden of a guilt that I knew would not be easily removed. And at the same time, a silent anger was beginning to grow inside me, like a flame that didn't want to be extinguished. When I looked at Kaio at that moment, he seemed to know what I was thinking. His eyes, filled with a sadness he couldn't hide, held me captive with a single gaze. And for a brief second, the rest of the world disappeared. It no longer mattered that Marina was nearby, that the others were laughing and talking. Kaio and I were back in that place, in that moment, where nothing else mattered but us. He didn't say anything, but there was no need. The silence between us spoke more than any words could. In the following days, Kaio and I began to avoid each other at all costs. The tension was unbearable, and every time he was near me, the feeling of betrayal and desire grew stronger. I didn't know how to deal with it, with this turmoil inside me. All I wanted to do was scream at Marina, tell her that everything she was about to do was a mistake, that Kaio was not the man she thought, that he would never be able to love her as she deserved, because he loved me. He always loved me. And I loved him too. But that was not the path I had chosen. I was trapped in my own maze of lies, and the walls were closing in. I knew what was at stake. I knew that if things got out of control, I would lose everything. My friendship with Marina, my dignity, my own heart. But at the same time, there was something in me that was beginning to accept the idea of losing everything, if it meant that Kaio would be mine alone. Because deep down, I knew I could no longer live with the idea of him being married to her, of seeing him with someone else. And in the end, this obsession was beginning to dominate my thinking. That night was the last time I tried to be Marina's friend. She was excited, almost euphoric, talking about the wedding preparations, asking my opinion on the dress and the colors of the event. And me, I couldn't stop thinking about Kaio, what he was feeling, and the internal battle that consumed me every second. It was then that suddenly the vision of him appeared before me. He was standing at the balcony door, looking out to sea, alone. And something in me, something visceral, pulled me to him. I didn't want to run away anymore. I no longer wanted to hide what was becoming unbearable. I found him, and he looked at me with that look that only he had, the look that made me forget about the rest of the world. Marina is happy, isn't she? I tried to sound natural, but the pain was evident in my voice. Kaio paused, as if he was reflecting on each word he was going to say. He moved closer, and the space between us seemed to be disappearing. He took a deep breath, his eyes lost somewhere in the distance, before finally answering. "I don't know what I'm doing, Luana," he said, his voice hoarse. "I love you, but I know I can't have you. I know I made a choice, and now, I have to live with this." I felt my heart break. His every word was a knife, cutting through what was left of me. I knew he was right. He had made a choice. But for a moment, I wished he had chosen me. I tried to take a step back, but my hands treacherously reached for him, and before I knew it, his hands were on my face. His lips were against mine, and reality no longer mattered. It was just him and me. In that kiss, I felt like we were two worlds colliding. Sin and passion, love and betrayal. And deep down, I knew there was no turning back. The truth always finds a way to come out. No matter how much you try to hide it, it always comes out. And when it does, the impact is devastating. It was as if time had stopped. Kaio's kiss consumed me, and at the same time, I knew there was no turning back. The line between love and lies had already been crossed irreversibly, and now, all I wanted was to run away from what was coming next. But for some reason, I still couldn't pull myself away from him. I still wanted to be there, in the warmth of his arms, in the whispers he made to me that burned my heart with each word. But reality soon caught up with us. The next morning was cold and silent. The house was in turmoil with preparations for Marina's wedding, but I couldn't help but feel like a stranger in that place. Every laugh, every word about Marina's happiness made me feel like I was suffocating, because deep down, I knew her happiness was a lie, built on a secret that was about to be revealed. Kaio avoided me, as I avoided him, but the desire and guilt between us were still palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog that blinded us. He knew that what was between us was not just a transgression. It was a love that had been going on in secret since childhood, and that now could no longer be denied. And yet, he knew there was nothing he could do. He had already made the choice to move forward with Marina. But I was lost. That love he felt for me was real. I knew it. But he had made a choice. He was about to move on to a different life, a life with Marina, and I couldn't stop it. At the same time, I couldn't help but wish for more. I couldn't help but want him to be mine, for him to truly choose me. It was then that Marina called me. She was sitting in the living room, alone, with a vacant, tired look. As I got closer, I could feel something was wrong. There was a tense silence between us, as if she already knew what had happened, as if she was waiting for the right moment to confront me. She looked at me, her eyes sad, and yet filled with naive hope. "Luana, what happened with you and Kaio?" Her voice was calm, but there was a subtle pain in the words. She already knew. She had felt it. I swallowed hard. The words felt stuck in my throat, and her gaze made me feel like I was drowning. The weight of guilt, of betrayal, was crushing me, and for a moment, I thought about lying, but I knew lying was no longer an option. "Marina, I began, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear of losing everything paralyzed me. She interrupted me, her eyes now steady and certain. She already knew, somehow. "I saw the way he looked at you, Luana. I felt it. And before you say anything, I already know. I just wanted to hear from you." She gave a low, almost emotionless laugh. I didn't know love could be so complicated. I looked at her, unable to hide the pain that shot through her. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve to be betrayed like that. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Marina, but Kaio and we have a history, and I don't know what to do with it anymore. I love you so much. You know that. You've always been my best friend, and I never wanted to lose you." Marina was silent for a long time, as if she was absorbing every word, processing the pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that I had never heard before. "I don't know what's harder, Luana. Whether it's knowing that you've always been in love with him, or understanding that, in the end, this won't change anything. He's going to marry me, Luana. I'm not giving up on this. And if you love me, you will accept this. You will learn to live with it." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words crushing my soul. She was right. What could I do? I couldn't take Kaio away from her. I couldn't erase what had happened between us. Kaio appeared at the door at that moment. He looked at me with the same heavy gaze, as if he too knew that the moment of truth had arrived. He knew he couldn't stand between the two of them any longer, couldn't keep the lie alive any longer. He had to make a choice. I looked at him, and he did the same. A silent goodbye look, because I knew there was no more room for us. He had a life to lead, and I couldn't be the person holding him back anymore. I wanted him to be happy, even if it wasn't by my side. Marina got up from her chair with a deep sigh and walked towards Kaio. She looked him straight in the eyes, and without saying anything else, hugged him tightly. I stood there, watching the scene, knowing that this was the last time I would see Kaio as anything more than a friend. The pain was unbearable, but at the same time, something inside me was beginning to calm down. It was the end. It was the goodbye I needed, even if I wasn't ready for it. And so the story ended. Me, Marina, and Kaio. 3 people connected by a forbidden love, by a secret that should never have been revealed. But that, in the end, taught us that love is not something that can be controlled, that can be manipulated. Love is something you feel, without explanations, without guarantees, without promises. But still he goes. He always goes.